Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really profound diagnosis of the human condition. And this isn't some abstract head-in-the-clouds philosophy. It starts with what's described as uncompromising realism about life's fundamental challenges. And then it offers a clear path for how we can respond.
This quote, man, it just cuts right to the heart of it all, doesn't it? It's this super simple but really profound truth we all know but often try to forget. Everything changes, everything ends. Doesn't matter if it's a king's fancy chariot or our own body. Nothing is permanent. So where do we even begin with this? Well, it's not with some lofty, complicated ideas. Instead, it asks us to look like square in the face of life's hard facts. It introduces this powerful concept called the divine messengers, warnings that show up in our everyday lives, if we're actually willing to see them.
Okay, so when you hear divine messengers, I want you to forget any images of, angels with harps or supernatural beings. That's not what this is about. These messengers are way more common and, honestly, probably a lot more powerful. They're the things we see every single day, these unavoidable reminders of our own fragility that we so often try to just look away from.
Think of these as a series of wake-up calls. We've all seen an elderly person, frail and bent over. We've all known someone who's sick and in real pain. And we've all had to confront the reality of death. But here's the kicker. The real question isn't just, have you seen these things? Because of course you have. The question is, have you really truly understood what they're telling you about your own life?
Now you'd think that facing all this, old age, sickness, death, would just lead to total despair, right? But the intended response is the complete opposite. It's meant to be a call to action. It's this ethical push to look at the limited time you have and ask yourself, okay, how can I use this time wisely? How can I live a better life?
All right, and this leads us to what might be one of the most practical and honestly life-changing ideas in this whole analysis. The huge difference between the pain you can't avoid and the suffering that, you actually create for yourself. And the way this is explained is through this brilliant metaphor of two darts. The first dart, that's the actual event. It's the physical pain, the loss, the setback that just happens to you. That one's unavoidable. It's part of life. But the second dart, that's our reaction. It's the story we tell ourselves, the resentment, the why me, the despair. And here's the thing, that second dart, it's totally optional.
So here's where you can see those two paths in action. On one hand, you have the uninstructed worldling, which, let's be honest, the source says is most of us. You get hit by that first dart, and bam, you immediately shoot yourself with the second one, the mental anguish. But on the other side, you have the instructed disciple. They still feel the sting of that first dart. That's unavoidable, but they've learned how not to fire off the second one.
And this all plays out with what are called the 8 worldly conditions. You've got gain and loss, fame and, not so fame, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. The typical reaction, right, is to get totally swept up in it all. You're flying high when you get praise, you're crushed when you get blamed. That's the second dart at work. But a wiser response? It's recognizing that all this stuff comes and goes. It's about finding an inner balance, a kind of equanimity, no matter what's happening on the outside.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This whole internal mess, it's not just your own personal problem. The source makes a powerful argument that what happens inside our heads has huge, massive consequences that ripple out into the world. So according to this analysis, big conflicts, we're talking wars, major disputes, they don't just pop up out of nowhere. Their roots are actually found in a really powerful inner attachment. It's this deep, almost desperate clinging to our desires, our stuff, and maybe the most dangerous of all, our own opinions.
And that deep attachment, it naturally starts to breed other difficult emotions. It leads to envy of what other people have, and this really possessive, defensive need to protect what we think is mine.
And here's the final and kind of devastating result. The teaching draws a straight line from that inner clinging all the way to outer conflict. We're talking quarrels, disputes, even violence. The implication here is just profound. You can't really have societal peace without a fundamental change happening inside of individuals. Okay, so to really grasp the ultimate stakes here, from this perspective, we have to zoom way out, like from a single human life to a truly cosmic, mind-bending scale. And this is where we get the concept of samsara. Now, this isn't just one life followed by heaven or hell. It's described more like a directionless wandering through a whole series of lives, stretching back so far you can't even find a beginning. And the fuel for this endless cycle? Our own ignorance and our own craving.
So how long are we talking? Well, the timescale is almost impossible for our brains to wrap around. But the source uses some incredibly vivid similes to try and give us a sense of just one eon, or as it's called, a kappa.
Okay, get this. Suppose there's a huge stone mountain, miles high, and every 100 years, someone comes and just gently strokes it once with a piece of fine silk cloth. The idea is that eventually that whole mountain would be worn away to nothing. But even then, a single eon still wouldn't be over.
And if that doesn't just blow your mind, there's the second simile. Imagine all the grains of sand in the entire river Ganges. The teaching says that the number of eons we have already wandered through is even more than that. It's basically a way of saying our journey has been practically infinite.
So after you're confronted with this, honestly kind of terrifying, vast scale, you'd probably expect a super complex solution, right? But the path forward that's proposed is actually surprisingly direct and personal.
So what's the very first step on this path? It's not some grand gesture, it's not taking a vow of poverty. It's a faculty called Yonimanasankara, and it's a fancy way of saying careful attention. It's simply the act of waking up from being on autopilot and starting to look really closely at how we're actually living our lives. Because without this careful attention, the text says we're basically like a dog tied to a post. We just keep running in circles around our own attachments, our anxieties, our sense of self, just running and revolving, never really getting anywhere, and never finding real freedom.
So, when you boil it all down, the response is an ethical one. It's about living by the Dhamma, these universal principles of right conduct, and really committing to wholesome, meritorious actions. See, it's not about escaping the world. It's about engaging with the world more skillfully, but armed with this really clear-eyed understanding of our shared human condition.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. After looking at this whole diagnosis, what divine messengers, what everyday realities of aging or illness or loss are showing up in your life right now, just asking for your careful attention?